Thank you for joining our webinar with Vitally. Really excited to welcome Steph and Celine from Vitally, who are experts in customer success. And so we're going to be chatting about a couple different things today. We're going to be chatting about how Vitally does CS and how experts kind of think about doing CS and engaging their customers, how they engage customers across different channels. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits and downsides of email. We'll talk about the same with Slack. We'll have a little bit of a debate about those two. And then we'll open it up about 2024 in general and CS's role in today's world and how that's changing a little bit. So really excited to welcome Steph and Celine. Maybe we can actually just start, Steph, Celine, with a quick round of intros, if you don't mind.
Sure. I can kick us off. My name is Steph Towns, and I am a senior CSM here at Vitally, and I manage our strategic and enterprise customers. But I've been CSMing for the better part of 10 years now, and I've done managed, then did scaled for a few years, and now I'm back to enterprise CS.
Wonderful.
I'm Celine Dumar. Nice to meet everyone. Excited to be here today. I'm also a senior CSM at Vitally. I've been here for about 2 years, but similar to Steph, have been CSMing for almost 10 years now, which is crazy. I've kind of had my hands in all different facets of CS. So onboarding, enterprise CS, mid-market CS, done it all. So excited to talk to everybody today.
Out of screen sharing mode so we can see everyone's face. For those listening in, just one heads up, we have a Q&A function here. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. I will try to incorporate those either throughout, and we'll also have time at the end to address some questions. You can also upvote questions that come in as well. So why don't we start with the first question, which is how you all at Vitally run CS, how you engage with your customers. And let's just start there as a foundation.
Sure. So we are split up into tiers, tier 1 through tier 4. So my accounts fall into tier 1, and they get sort of the white glove CS approach, which is why by default I ask them if they want to set up a shared Slack channel. I, as a CSM, am very involved in every single stage of the customer lifecycle journey. So very involved in implementation, and the SA and I kind of go hand in hand throughout that. And so having that shared communication and that shared channel is crucial during implementation, especially because I'm onboarding very large teams that all kind of operate differently internally. So it's helpful to have kind of that shared channel. And then the tiers go down from there. So Celine, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Mine is definitely more of a case-by-case basis in terms of how I work with customers and how I determine like the best way to kind of communicate with them. So I don't have Slack channels with all of my customers. That would get a little bit too crazy. I sort of do case-by-case basis. Some customers, it makes a lot of sense to have Slack channels. Some customers, it does not make as much sense to have Slack channels. So it really just depends on how my customers work best. And I'll often ask them like if that's something they would prefer, or if that's not something that they would prefer, and kind of work from there. That being said, I don't offer that, or I don't offer Slack to all of my customers. So it really just kind of depends on the needs of the customer and how they like to work. So I'm fluid there, have a good mix in my book of business.
And Celine, how many customers would you say roughly fall in your book? And then Steph, for you, how does that compare to roughly how many you manage?
Yeah, I have about 35 customers at any given point.
Yep. And I think right now I have 18. Just got a new customer yesterday, actually. But I would say I want to go over about 20.
Cool. And Steph, sounds like for larger customers, they tend to prefer when you offer Slack as a channel to engage. They tend to take you up on that, and some of them actually jump at that. And then Celine, similar, but you don't offer it to everybody simply because your volume, and so you offer it to the certain ones that make the most sense. As you kind of think about employing strategies across Slack, how do you think about engaging your customers or enhancing that customer experience?
I I think like one, we use Thena, not to plug Thena, but using Thena to like do kind of like mass communications and engagements across all of those Slacks is really, really helpful. In my day to day, like having the ability to have that super quick communication to share information or ask questions is really helpful. It gets things done a lot more quickly in a lot of cases. And for some of my larger customers, especially for customers that are kind of new, they may have, like 20, 25 people in a Slack channel.
Mhm.
Having that sort of channel to be able to communicate quickly and get questions answered makes for a much better experience on the customer side and really helps from an adoption perspective during kind of the beginning part of that relationship.
Yeah, I think for me, they don't prefer it. They almost beg for it. Like as soon as I say, "Hey, do you want to set up a Slack?" They're like, "Yes," like set up a Slack channel. And I think there's so many different benefits to it. Like yes, Slack can get noisy, but a tool like Thena obviously helps manage that chaos, as y'all like to say. But it's also helpful for the little things. So the little enhancements that get released, like we send out a blast and we just select the audience of Thena channels and it just sends out automatically and people can react to those. So I can cater my outreach from there based on somebody who threw a fire emoji on the product release blast that I sent out. But also internally, it's helpful too. Like the SA and I are super in sync during implementation. And let's say the customer were to email in, but accidentally not CC me on that email. And unless I looked in Vitally, I wouldn't have visibility into that. And so it's just a wider avenue for visibility across our internal teams. And if I'm out of office, what I'll do is I'll send out a blast via Thena. And then what's nice about that is like, instead of everyone getting, an out of office email from me and then having to forward that question that they have to someone else on my team, like I can just tap into my manager or another CSM on my team and say, hey, like I'm out of office traveling for a customer this week. Do you mind just hopping into, these two channels for some high priority requests that come in? It's so much easier to do that. And I still have the visibility. Like I'll still scan my Slack channels and make sure that like the folks that are covering me are responding in a, reasonable amount of time.
Mhm. Before you had a tool to help with that, what was it like before? How did you manage that when you were going to be traveling or out of office?
The tool, our previous Slack.
No, before you had Thena.
Oh, I mean, I didn't really have a tool for it. My save for laters in Slack,
Mm,
like 40 requests long, and I wouldn't know, how to prioritize that. Or like Thena tags like they use AI to tag the urgency of that request. And so it makes it a lot easier to prioritize that. Otherwise, I would get to the end of the day after being like today, I've been back to back since 7:30 until 4. And then by the end of the day, I'm scrolling through my save for later Slacks and it's chaotic, truly. And it takes me hours at the end of my day to like figure out which ones to prioritize. And so now my save for later section is just the internal Slacks that I want to read later, which is nice.
makes sense. And you mentioned kind of when you offer it, and Selena, I'd be curious your thoughts on this too. When you offer it now, customers jump at the chance. Have you almost started to see a demand from the market where customers were almost either expecting it or asking for it proactively more recently in the last year or two compared to maybe like 4 years ago? Have you started to see an increase in demand?
It's definitely more common because so many of our customers also offer Slack channels to their customers. So it's just now more of like
Mm,
a known way to communicate with customers. I will say I think like customers are respectful of like whether or not that is something that you as a CSM typically do. So I think it kind of just depends, but I'll also say I've had customers say no. They're like, my Slack is too noisy already. Like I don't want more in my Slack. So I've even seen like kind of the other side of the gamut. Slack is really noisy. It is hard to like remember to go back to something if you read it and didn't respond immediately. So I've even had customers decline because they don't want to manage another Slack channel because they're also managing a bunch of their Slack channels with their customers. So I think it has become a known avenue to communicate, but I don't think in my experience it's necessarily expected of CSMs.
Yeah, I will say on the enterprise side, so myself, I have a smaller book of business. Like I am in Slack talking to my coworkers all day, every day. And I also want to have that kind of informal communication with my customers too. I feel like you get more personality out of your customers and you build more confidence with them if you're able to kind of chat one-on-one or create threads for discussions with other internal team members, like from the customer side. Like, somebody will start a Slack thread and then 4 different people from the customer are all chiming in with their thoughts. And we're able to kind of brainstorm new use cases, and I'll tell them how we're using Vitally to do XYZ. And so I don't know. I find that I'm in Slack talking to my coworkers all day, every day. Like I might as well talk to my customers in that fashion too. And then I'm not like bouncing back and forth from email. I'm going to see the message quicker. So for me, now I don't have 35 accounts. I find it like 100 times easier to just have my customers with my coworkers. It's nice.
I love it. So why don't we use this as a time to pivot into the great debate of email versus Slack. And let's start with the advantages of email for customer communication and engagement, because there are advantages. Celine, you even hit on some. What are your thoughts on where email really fits and where it adds value?
I think email can be really helpful from like an organization perspective. Like I have folders in my email where I put things and save them for later. I don't have to like scroll through an endless Slack channel to find a very specific thread or comment that I know that a customer sent me. So I think from an organization perspective, it can be really helpful just from like a tracking perspective. Actually yesterday I was preparing something for a leader on my team, and she was like, can you send it to me in an email? Did not want it over Slack because like she's going to lose it in Slack. We're going to talk all day and now she's going to have to scroll up to get that information. So I think for things like that, and even sometimes like follow-ups with customers, if the Slack channel is really noisy, putting a follow-up in that channel is going to get really lost. So for those more like formal things you need to track, I think email can be really helpful. And also it's a good way to like file information away in sort of different folders for your different customers, for example.
Yeah, I would say from the leadership perspective, like if I need to get our CEO involved in a discussion with a leader from one of my customers, like I don't usually see the execs wanting access to a shared Slack channel. And so that's where I see the benefit. But to be completely transparent, like the advantages of email for me are dwindling, truly, especially when it comes to like product releases and product updates. Like, I don't know, I feel like with those automated blasts, like those sometimes go just unnoticed, or people end up, I'll come back to that email and then they delete it because they want to clear out their inbox and get to that inbox 0. And so I'm able to, I don't know, take that piece out of it and give it a more personal touch, and allow the end users. So, maybe execs don't need to see every single tiny release that we come out with, but all of the CSMs and the day-to-day users, like that's super important for them to be able to see right off the bat. But yeah, email, I mean, I check it a couple times a day, but I am like not regularly going back and forth to my email at this point. A lot of noise.
Yeah, interesting. The leadership aspect, especially internal. So internal use cases, email can sometimes be advantageous, especially when you're interacting with an exec that maybe doesn't want to be in certain channels. One tactical question, I'm curious how you do it at Vitally. So you have external channels with customers. Do you also tend to also have internal channels for each account or for most accounts as well, where you might talk about the account itself?
It kind of depends. So if there's, a risky renewal that comes up potentially, or if there's a renewal plan at all for that customer, like we'll spin up an internal channel just so, CEO is involved, AM is involved if need be, like leadership from CS can get involved, and there's just more eyes on it. And so we'll just archive those when the customer goes through renewal. And that's really, those are the biggest use cases, like anything risk related or anything kind of QBR, those larger format executive review kinds of sessions that you run with your customers. Like we definitely want to be talking about that internally in a channel.
Interesting.
Or
okay.
like also, if a customer is about to kick off, the AE will also, spin up a channel. Our enterprise AE loves to do that. He'll spin up a channel and just talk through like what happened in the deal cycle and what I need to know, so that transition is a little bit more smooth.
Okay, makes sense. One more tactical question for everyone else's benefit. Do you tend to, or does sales tend to open up an external channel in the sales process? Or when do channels tend to get open up with customers?
Sales does. I personally have not inherited a sales channel though. I don't know if you have, Steph, but I know that sales does open up channels with our customers or with their prospects. But I personally have not inherited a sales spun up channel. I actually don't know if it's because sales is kind of letting that channel archive and then letting the CSM or implementation manager make that decision, or if I just haven't come across it yet. Steph, I don't know if you've had different experience.
I think I've inherited 2 of them. One of them was very recent. But also we give our prospects and potential customers like access to demo environments, and then I think they set up meetings to like actively work in there. So I don't see that a ton. I'd have to ask our AEs. I don't know if they get archived, but I have created a lot of my customer channels on my own.
Cool. Very helpful. Yeah, we see a mix where sometimes people will archive the sales channel and then spin up a new one if they want to have one during implementation post sales. And then sometimes they transition the channel and then just move people in and out. So very helpful. Okay, so certainly some benefits of email, especially engaging internal stakeholders, in some cases engaging external stakeholders. Celine, you mentioned breaking through the noise if a channel is really busy and sometimes you don't want things to get lost in there. Sending it over email can help. But Slack also has advantages. So how do you see Slack kind of fitting in the advantages and real-time interactions with customers compared to email?
Yeah, I think Steph has a ton of opinion on this, but I do think that sort of like the informal manner that you have in Slack can be really helpful in building a better relationship with your customer. Like that sort of ability to communicate really quickly, have more dynamic discussions directly in Slack, all within like an hour, is really beneficial to getting things done faster, having discussions that don't have to be meetings, and then ultimately like providing your customer with a better experience because of what you've been able to accomplish directly in Slack. So I think that piece of it is super helpful. And like I said, like the ability to build a relationship because of the informality of Slack is, I think, another big benefit there, not just for us to our customers, but our customers are more transparent and honest with us as well over Slack. So it's a two-way street, and that is really helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this topic. I'm a huge advocate for Slack communication. I feel that I am more informal in the way that I present to teams, and like I'm not a huge slides gal. Like I will die on that hill. Like I don't think people like to sit and be talked at and shown a bunch of slides. And so what I'm able to do is like do quick huddles, or I can easily share like statuses. And by that, I mean, if I'm running to a doctor appointment for an hour or two, like I'll put a little emoji and let people know, like almost like back to AIM days where you would like go away for a couple of hours and come back. But my customers know that. Like this week, I was traveling and on a plane on Tuesday. And then I was with a customer the entire day on yesterday. And then I was flying back. And instead of having to set up an out of office message and do the auto replies, I was able to just, throw my little airplane emoji on there and then let them know yesterday, like, hey, I'm on site with a customer all day. So, if you need me, let me know, but my responses are going to be delayed. But then also, like, if I'm able to answer questions quickly, like in between meetings, or, if I'm sitting in an all hands and somebody needs access to a quick doc or something, and I can just respond then, it cuts down the time that I have to be live on Zooms a lot, especially during implementation. So the SA that's working on the account can just quickly, troubleshoot an issue here and there versus like, hey, we have these 3 issues, like, send me a booking link and let me know when I can book time, and have to go through that whole song and dance. And we can pin like, booking links to the top of channels and their implementation plans. So again, it's like keeping everything in one spot. Like, I've got Slack and I've got Vitally, and those are the tools that I live in all day, every day. And then I check my email a couple times a day.
Don't ever email Steph.
Yeah, don't do an email.
This is good to know. I love it. And okay, so can you share if you have any examples of specific outcomes or metrics that have really been impacted, or you feel have been impacted by having a Slack channel with a customer, either through building better relationships and that improve the renewal likelihood, expansion and upsell and cross-sell? Any specific examples that you can share?
Well, I think from a KPI perspective, like having, Slack communication versus not, we're still all gold on the same metrics. I will say Slack has helped me get more in the weeds with more end users. So we have a product that's typically very operations focused. Like, we are typically working with the ops folks who are setting up Vitally. And I don't always get access to all of the end users and CSMs that are using the tool. And so what I've done for a couple of my customers is spin up kind of a secondary channel, which that might get out of hand eventually, but right now it's okay, where it'll be like a tiger team of CSMs where I meet with them every month. But if they have quick questions or if I want to share best practices, I have access to, and I'm more multi-threaded with more folks at the account. And I'll do random, like I just launched something I call the Vitally Skills Lab, which are like quick little 5-minute, hey, here's a best practice for how I use Vitally. I hope it helps your day to day. And so I'm seeing better adoption metrics across the board. And I'm able to hear from the CSMs like, hey, we have this template that, we really don't like for XYZ reasons. And I wish that operations could edit it in this way. And I'm able to be the voice and the liaison between the end users and the leads and the operations folks. So I think it's just helped like nurture some of these accounts and allow me to be more multi-threaded into my customers.
Yeah, I would say if we were to put like metrics on it, I would tie it back to time to value, like during implementation for sure. And then in addition to that, adoption across the team, like doing those little 5-minute videos or having quick access to like the CSMs that are actually using Vitally, they're able to get their questions answered more quickly, problem solved fast. And so they're able to like continue their workflow in Vitally. So that watching that like CSM weekly active user percentage or whatever those metrics are that we track internally, like seeing an improvement there, I think are the metrics that are impacted by having those Slack channels.
I love that. And a tangent on that is also, I think, broader visibility too, because Steph, you mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll have 25 people from a customer in a channel, and where email might be siloed with smaller groups, you have a broader visibility where if you post something like a skill or a video in a channel, other people can see that as well.
Right. And I'm not having to forward an email. I can just tag them in a thread, you know what I mean? And then they can pass that along. Like I've gotten on a Tiger team call where a CSM was like, hey, did you see that dog Steph put in the channel? And then they ran to the channel and they went and found it. So it's just easier knowledge sharing, really.
Yeah, I think that wider net of people is a huge benefit of Slack, actually. Like having the team in Slack. If I was sending emails, I would not send an email to their entire CSM team.
Right.
So like they wouldn't get the same information that I'm sharing via Slack. And so they would probably be a little more disconnected from like myself as their CSM and probably just Vitally in general, because they wouldn't be getting like, hey, here's this like small but impactful product release that we had, because that's what I'm putting in the Slack channel.
Yeah. And I will say, like, people are hesitant about Slack channels in general or adding folks to Slack channels, but I haven't really seen a huge issue with that. I feel like I'm not going to sit all day and blow up all of my coworkers on Slack and bother them. And I feel that my customers are respectful of that as well. I try to set some like ground rules, like, hey, let's try to not spin off into 19 different one-on-one Slacks. But I feel like there's just a general level of respect and customers appreciate the fact that we're offering it at all. And so I'm just like, hey, if you want to add people to the Slack channel, like go for it. If they need it for the visibility purposes alone, like I don't care if they're in there. So
Yeah, last thing I'll say on that is the other thing that actually is super helpful, especially during sort of like the adoption phase. People are asking a lot of like how-to questions and sort of like support related questions. And like being able to click create intercom ticket in Thena is a very easy way to like say, I'm sending you to support without like now having to create an email outside of Slack and share it to support. It's a very easy way for me to continue to like provide efficient support, but also redirect them and say, like, this is actually not a me question. This is a support question. So there's also some of that sort of like expectation setting, what my role is versus what support's role is. The ability to do that in Slack makes the Slack channel a lot more appealing, in my opinion.
yeah, that's actually huge. And I forgot to touch on that, but yesterday while I was at my onsite, I think I put the ticket emoji on like 4 different customer Slacks. So I didn't have to do anything except hop on my phone and just throw that emoji on. And that is such a huge win and such a small thing. Like it's such a low lift from our end. But the fact that all of the responses from support immediately go to that thread, awesome. Like 10 out of 10.
I think it's such a good way to make customers feel really supported without feeling like, oh, the CSM is pushing me away, like pushing me to support. Like, not that that's a bad thing. I think most customers expect, hey, there's expectations for each role, et cetera, but it is a great way to kind of like keep everything in one place and make them feel like, hey, actually, I'm just bringing more people into the Slack channel to support you. I'm not making you go somewhere else to get this answer.
Yeah.
I think that's a big unlock. And you mentioned it, Celine, but historically you would have had to either tell the customer, hey, can you email support or go to intercom and submit a ticket, or you would do it on their behalf, but that means you need to go spin up an email, copy your customer, send it to support, and then support gets confused. Sometimes we see if it's coming from internal rather than external. So being able to do that. And Steph, I really like your example of you're busy, you're running around, you're in meetings back to back, being able to see something and then one click, send it to intercom, and then the team can take care of it rather than the customer needing to wait. So I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Steph, you mentioned earlier about sending out messages to customers kind of in a broadcast type method where maybe some release notes or updates about products coming out. JP asked a question too. Do you also send those to an email distribution? Does marketing send an email distribution separately? How do you think about that? Like, do you do both or do you do one or the other?
Both. Well, there's sometimes 3 things that happen actually. So if it's a really small release, like we updated some some dashboard widgets the other day that allowed them to do some more dynamic filtering on specific colors that they set on trades, right? That was like a little update. That was a big win for a few of our customers, but I just threw that in a blast. I will say we have monthly releases that go out via like automations and marketing blasts. And then also when we do little enhancements like that, we use a tool called Chameleon to allow for like an in-app pop-up to show up as soon as they log in next and say, hey, there's this new feature called boards, and this is how you use it. It's like an interactive product pop-up that explains what the feature is and when it got released.
Love that. So truly meeting your customer wherever they are. If they're in Slack, if they're in email, if they're in app, it doesn't matter. They're going to see that message.
They're gonna hear from us, whether they want to or not.
I love it. Celine, anything else to add on there?
No, nothing from my end. Steph covered it all.
Cool. Steph, you mentioned kind of one-on-ones or DMs. Any tips that you have for people that maybe have channels with customers, they get a lot of DMs and maybe they don't want to, or they want to make sure things are tracked in the channel? How do you handle DMs with customers? Just more tactical.
I mean, sometimes I have one-on-one chats with a few like folks from operations or some leads that want to run things by me. But for the most part, whatever they're asking is probably something that somebody else a week or two from now might also need to know the information. And so I tell them, like, we do use a technology that allows me to track my channels specifically, but I can't track all of my one-on-one DMs. And so I tell them, like, at the end of the day, I'm worried that I'm going to miss this. And if it's in your channel, it's automatically being tracked by this technology we use. And it's a way for me to understand, like, how many requests I have coming in, like, what's my average like close rate, if you will, because I don't use email and there's no way for me to, okay, I use email. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I want to track like the work that I'm doing. And the way that I do that is using my Thena dashboard to understand like what's my first response time, is that going up or down, and all of those different metrics. And so I try to guide them, back to the channel, and just let them know like there aren't silly questions. Like you don't need to feel the need to kind of chat me one-on-one. And it's gone over pretty well.
I get a lot of DMs. You have to set the expectation. Yeah, you have to set the expectation, like keep it in the channel. I will say the Slack UI update, whenever they did that, actually did help with keeping track of DMs a little bit. Like it put them a little bit more at the forefront of my UI. Like I don't completely lose it if I read it and then forget to respond immediately. So that has helped a little bit, but I do think when it comes to like customer management, the DMs, they're not out of hand, but it is much easier if it's all in the channel. And like Steph said, probably a question somebody else on their team has, so might as well throw it in the channel rather than do a DM.
I love that. Yeah, I've seen DMs can be really good for relationship building and maybe, doing things outside of the core work. But if there's a general question, as much as possible, getting it back into the channel can be helpful. Right. And Steph, you mentioned also the concept of being able to track the work. That way, the volume, where historically Slack has always been like a black box for a lot of people. You don't know how much work and time is going into it, and being able to track that actually gives you visibility. And also then you can say, hey, look how busy we are. We should hire another team member to help.
Exactly. I will say, like, I do have one-on-one chats, but it's usually for, like, I feel like I've become friends with a lot of my clients, especially the ops folks that I work with literally every single day of my life. And so we'll have a one-on-one chat, but we're not usually chatting about like work-specific stuff. Like we'll chat about travel and, a restaurant that we went to. I mean, I talk to my customers on Slack like I would talk to my coworkers and my friends. And I love that I have that relationship with these folks. And I feel like Slack allows for that, which is cool.
Wonderful. So why don't we pivot into broader value of CS in 2024, because the last couple of years, there's been a lot of change in the way in which people are approaching go-to-market in general, are approaching sales, are approaching CS. How do you think recently the perception and importance of CS has changed over the last few years?
Yeah, I think customer success, I mean, I've been in it for 10 years. When I first started in CS, like my job title was product consultant because there wasn't like a name for the industry that we're currently in. But I think it's really gone from kind of a nice to have to a need to have. Customer retention is so important, especially right now in this market. I think the customer success industry in general, like is really just getting started. It's becoming really, really important for every organization to really care about. And it's not just the CS team caring about CS. The entire company really needs to be behind the CS team, because at the end of the day, like that's what we're doing. We're trying to service our customers, and product is doing that, engineering is doing that, sales is doing that, everyone is doing that. So I think there's been a mindset shift over the last few years in terms of like the role that customer success plays at an organization and the role that everyone plays at an organization in customer success in general.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I feel like CS in general is evolving so much. And at the end of the day, like people say, like, what's the day-to-day of a CSM? And it's so hard to answer because there's so much that goes into this role. But at the end of the day, what I have found with my customers is they want to feel like they have a true strategic partner that's not looking at them saying, all right, you tell me what you want to do. It's like, we have this process or our ideal state, and we need you to provide the strategic guidance of how can we do that? Or how can we use this tool stack we have to implement this process we have? And they need us to be that expert. I also feel like there are thousands of tech tools out there, right? Lots of competition, tools doing similar things. At the end of the day, CS is an experience that a customer is buying. And if you have, this white glove kind of offering, that still allows you to have a good quality of life as a CSM. Like a customer is buying the experience. They're buying that customer service, if you will. And I feel like, a tool like Thena does help with that, because I'm like, hey, we can have this like very kind of regular flow of communication via Slack. And that's something that we are offering you as part of this whole customer success experience that you're purchasing from us. And I feel like it's crucial right now in CS to, especially with the economy and the market and the layoffs that are happening, like it's so tragic to see, but it's going to be crucial for CS in general to focus on scaling resources without losing value to those customers. And it's quite literally the only conversations I'm having, and customers don't know where to start. And so they need that like true partner that's going to guide them to how they can get from point A to point B. So that's my take on it.
And it's super important. Improving value throughout. Let's talk about metrics and KPIs that are helpful. What do you think are the best metrics or the top metrics for demonstrating value from the CS side?
I mean, retention and expansion. Like, I feel like, yeah, NRR is going to be, the king of all CS KPIs, I think, until the end of time. But also I think like there's a huge focus especially for me and Celine, I'm sure you can agree, like champion building and champion nurturing. Like, I want to know that, if a customer leaves or if a champion leaves and goes to another company, let's say, like, I want them to say good things about their experience with me. And also, like, I want to build up and nurture champions so that I don't have to necessarily be the advocate for the entire org. Like, they'll go off and say, hey, like, have you used Vitally? Like, it's awesome. It does X, Y, and Z, and you should reach out to Steph to learn more how to use it. So champion building is huge and becoming more like multi-threaded with a customer.
Yeah, multi-threading I think is huge because of what's going on in the market right now. There's so much turnover in leadership and in the rest of the organization. So having multiple champions at an account is super, super important to ensuring like you're maintaining that relationship, and the relationship doesn't depend on just one person at that company. And I think Steph also brought up a good point. Like, I think this happened the other day. Not to plug Steph as a CSM, but someone at one of her existing customers is now a prospect of ours and spoke incredibly highly of Steph during the sales process, and is now talking to our sales team from this other company. And I think that sort of ability to build that relationship and have that then permeate elsewhere in the industry to prospects and anywhere else is really important, especially at this stage. Like for us, that's really great.
I love that. Do you use a tool to identify when users move to another company?
We use Vitally to do that. But yeah, we have like workflows and automation set up to make sure that we know when champions leave, when new champions join, and we have kind of processes in place so that we make sure we're reaching out to those people when they join and not finding out later. So we have automations and projects basically in place to make sure we are building those relationships off the bat. And if we don't know who to go to, we ask other people at that company, like, who is the new this persona, et cetera. So yeah, we use Vitally to manage all of that. And it's a process we put into place probably within the last like year-ish. And it's been so helpful to get proactively notified when the account owner at a specific account is, they're deactivated. Like, we definitely need to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah. And like she was saying, we get a project that spins up when a new admin is active, or when we have new users that are director level or higher. And then I'll reach out to my account manager and I'm like, hey, can you facilitate an intro to this person? They logged in once and I think they're kind of looking around, but they are, the director of CS and we haven't seen them before. And so I'll also partner pretty heavily with sales and the AM team to create those intros for me as well, since that's what sales is all about. So I let them do that.
I think that's super impactful. I think that's this idea of building and nurturing champions is a very underrated metric and really good KPI, or at least something to think in mind, even if it's qualitative. This wasn't in our prep materials, but what do you think is one of the more overrated metrics or KPIs, especially maybe in CS, if you can think of one?
Overrated.
I'm going to say this is a common one, I think, that I'm going to say NPS.
Yeah, actually.
NPS can be iffy. Like, who is answering NPS? Like, how broad of a audience are you getting when you're sending that out? If one person at a 100-person company has responded to NPS and there's someone that logged in once, like, that is something that I think people take really seriously. And in some companies, I think NPS is really helpful and really valuable. But I don't think that across the board, like, blanket NPS is, such a important metric for every single customer to be able to understand, like, their customer health.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've also had some customers tell me like, oh, that was an accidental click. Like, I didn't mean to give you a 0 on your NPS. Or I'll reach out to my admins and say, in our weekly syncs or in Slack, I'm like, hey, I got a bad score from XYZ. And they're like, oh, they don't even need to use Vitally on a daily basis. Like, you can ignore that. So I feel like I do sometimes take those with a grain of salt. But also I would say, like, trusting a health score that doesn't have a human element to it is also not a great practice, in my opinion. And it's also something that I sway my customers away from too. I feel like at the end of the day, product usage signals are great for a lot of things, and they're a good indicator of health, but I do not think that's the end all be all to health. Like, I think you definitely, what we do internally is we have like a CSM pulse where I, as a CSM, once a month, I am updating that pulse, and I have the ability to bring a customer, like if they were in the green and then I had, a risky call with them, I have the ability and the power to bring that health score from green to yellow automatically with one click. And I feel like you need to add kind of that human element to how you are measuring customer health in general.
Mm,
Yeah, relying solely on product usage data is very dangerous in my opinion, because you can have a customer that's logging in every day and using you and they look really healthy, but maybe they're evaluating another platform and they have to use a platform. So for the time being, yeah, they're logging in every day. They look super healthy, but like actually they're testing out something else. So I totally agree that having a human element. I mean, so many of our customers use Pulse in their health score too. So I think that's pretty common, but yeah, really important to have some sort of pulse or other kind of sentiment included as well.
I think that's super important. It reminds me of an anecdote that I heard once of a company that had a customer that was in the tax software space, and their health score was red 9 months out of the year because there was no adoption, no utilization. But then during tax season, it would spike up. And that was simply, they needed to add on the layer of qualitative and human perspective to recognize that it wasn't because the customer was actually red, but simply because there was some seasonality to their business. So I think that extra qualitative and human layer is super important. I love that.
Yeah.
One final question, and then we'll hit on a couple of the Q&A. So can you highlight a recent success story that exemplifies the impact of customer success at Vitally?
Well, I touched on this before, but creating the Tiger team avenues of communication has been huge. Like, I have uncovered that a customer is actually risky, and there was such a quick win to get them back to kind of that healthy state. And all I had to do was connect with the Tiger team. And as soon as we spun up that channel, they started to see the value. They, realized the little things that give them such a better quality and, quality of life from day to day, by just easing some frustrations and filling in those knowledge gaps and those enablement gaps that ops doesn't always pass along to the end users. And I feel like I had to kind of step in and do an initial lift. Like, I had to have a few sessions and run office hours and do all of that. But that was only about a month of my time. And since then, that customer has been adopting really well, and our NPS scores are going up. And it kind of had a trickle down effect. So I would say the Tiger team cohorts, and also like during implementation, being able to, not have to hop on as many meetings. I, as a CSM, can have visibility into everything that goes on during an implementation, even if I'm not, even if I'm more kind of a fly on the wall during that. So I would say those two use cases specifically for me are huge.
Yeah, I would add to that and say we recently started an initiative to start doing CS strategy mapping with all of our customers, especially with our new customers that sign on. That has been super impactful, just from the sense of customers come to us and they don't really know where to start. Some of them do, but a lot of them are like, what should I be doing? How should I be using this tool? And we started doing this strategy mapping early on to like really understand our customers' business, how they're structured, what they have, what their gaps are, and then kind of using that to like build the plan for the rest of the year. Like, based on the way you're structured and all of this, here's what we should be focused on in Vitally, and here's what we can build out to support your overall like CS strategy. So I think that's been really helpful in, one, getting to know our customers really well and in a way that matters early on. And then two, based on that, being able to like set them up for success long term. Because I think, a lot of times it's like a come renewal, they're like, well, I didn't set everything up properly, or like, I don't really know how to use it. And, setting this foundation really early on and documenting it also helps with, knowledge sharing internally at the customer. So I think that initiative has been really helpful, just for us to start really well with customers.
Which is especially important as turnover happens and people change roles, come in and out. Very helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a couple questions in Q&A. I want to hit on a few of those before we break. So Alberto asked a little bit about Slack or Teams, and curious from your perspective, first of all, do you have any customers that are in Teams, Microsoft Teams, or is everyone just Slack and email? And then, so it seems like no.
We must have like one or two maybe,
Okay.
but I would say probably 99% are in Slack.
Yeah.
Tends to be pretty common. Cool.
Yeah.
So Alberto, just as a heads up, we have a Microsoft Teams to Slack connector that bridges them back and forth, which can be really nice. So for the few customers you have in Teams, you don't need to log into Teams to actually get those messages. You can pull them right into Slack. And then Steph, a little bit of a preview, but we'll have an upcoming Slack and Thena to Vitally connector to get the data into Vitally for shared customers, which should be fun.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you're excited about too.
Wow.
Okay, so Pav asked, and Celine, I'm especially curious your perspective on this. Have you ever had customers that push back against? It sounds like you have pushed back against having a Slack channel. Do you try to convince them to get into Slack, or you just be okay with that and just kind of let them engage over email still?
Yeah, I have had customers that push back, and if they push back, I'm like, that's totally fine. I don't try to persuade them to get into Slack. At the end of the day, like, I want to meet them where they work. And if they work better out of email, and if they're going to receive information better out of email, then that's where I want to communicate with them. I, want to make their life easier. And if I'm making it harder by being in Slack, or if they're not going to get as much out of it by the communication in Slack, then I don't want to have that communication there. So if they're telling me like Slack is not going to work for me, I'm happy to move all of that to email for them. So whatever works best for them.
Yeah. I don't think I would like beg somebody to get on Slack. I haven't really had a situation where somebody was like, absolutely not, no, thank you. I think if they really didn't want it, I might just tell them like, hey, I don't need to, we don't need to chat on Slack, but it might be helpful for you to see resources that I send out via blasts or any sort of like enhancements that go out. Like it just might be good to have kind of off to the side for visibility. But again, I haven't run into that issue yet. So
cool. Wonderful. It goes back to what we were saying earlier about meet your customers where they prefer to work. And if they prefer to work in email, that's okay. Many prefer to work in Slack, and some even in Teams. So wonderful. And Travis asked a question about how you're leveraging AI in your day-to-day, any trends you're seeing, any strategies you want to suggest. Any thoughts there?
like how I'm using AI outside of.
If you're using AI at all, whether it be for content creation, writing messages, anything at all.
Well, I actually do use ChatGPT. Like if I need to ghost write an email for someone, I will get a starting point on ChatGPT. Like our leadership team often wants us to, spin up emails based on use cases that we have going on with a customer, and they don't have all the background. And so I'll give some bullet points to ChatGPT, and they will spit out a pretty beautifully written email for me that then I can customize and make personal. And then Notion's AI features are great, like being able to summarize a whole doc, things like that, or type up a specific type of doc. I often share like resources with customers, and being able to use Notion to help me out with that is great.
Yeah, I use it similarly to how you mentioned previously, where like if I need to write something up or need some advice, I'm like, how should I respond to this? Or like, what is a good way to respond with this tone, but still be firm? Like I kind of use ChatGPT to help me give me a start on like emails that I'm not quite sure how to write or things like that. That's how
What will be cool is like these CS tools, including Vitally, are going to be releasing AI type features like specific to sentiment analysis, which will be really cool. So like scanning emails from a customer or customer notes and then determining like a piece of their health based on that. So there's going to be a lot of really cool AI enhancements coming to CSPs also, which is great.
Yeah, excited for that.
Wonderful. Okay, final question. Any final thoughts, tips, strategies, or advice that you have for folks?
I think as a,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a CSM, like this is a very dynamic environment. You're in email, we're in Slack, like we're kind of everywhere. Like being flexible and being adaptable to what your customer needs and how they work best is how you're going to build the best kind of relationship with them. So yeah, just being flexible and being adaptable, especially right now, I think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just leaning into getting more strategic with your customers and having an opinion on things instead of just letting a customer say, hey, I'm going to do XYZ. It's like, well, why are you going to do XYZ? And how are you going to do this or that? And just, I don't know, I feel like QBRs are starting to die off. Like things are getting more informal. Customers like to be more casual with, the tools that they work with every day. And I have found that like Slack and meeting them where they work has really helped like build my relationships with my customers. So
You mentioned QBRs dying off. I think it's an interesting trend. I've seen more and more people just putting together maybe some materials, recording a loom, sending that loom maybe over Slack and saying, here's my summary. Let me know if you want to chat about anything. So yeah, definitely say that again, Celine.
That's another great debate.
Yeah, that'll be for next time. Wonderful. Well, Celine, Steph, super valuable insights. I think a lot of people look to you as experts in this space doing CS at a company like Vitally. So you guys are the experts for sure. Really appreciate your time and all your thoughts today. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Wonderful. All right. Well, take care, everybody. We'll end the webinar now, and we will be sharing out recordings as well. So we'll share that on via email. So thanks again for joining. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.